Thank you. Morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Children and Young People's Committee meeting. We start this morning with the minutes of the last meeting held on the 13th of September. Is everyone present happy that they are a true and accurate record, or any comments? No. Thank you. Happy with those. Do I have any apologies this morning?
Chairman, we do have a substitution. Councillor Daniel Williamson substitutes for Councillor Samantha Deakin for this meeting.
I just think Councillor Williamson likes being here. And you're very welcome, Councillor Williamson. Do we have any declarations of interest by members and officers? Any by members? Councillor Welsh.
I'm not sure if it is a deck or not, but there is a report on childcare sufficiency assessment, and my child does go to childcare and I do pay for that in Nottinghamshire. I don't know if that is something that I should declare or not, but I do pay towards childcare and he does go to childcare in Nottinghamshire.
Always on the side of declaring, Chairman, is the answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Any declarations from officers? No. So, the first report on the agenda today is the report from Adoption East Midlands, and that's an annual report for the year 2020 to 21. There are two recommendations on page 14 of the papers, which I move.
And I second those, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have any questions or observations on this paper?
Yes, Chair. It's just a query. I think, if I'm correct, some months ago, I think you wrote to someone in London about the current safeguarding capacity around the county. Did you? Can't remember. Judges and so on. I think you did right. I just want to know whether or not there is any response to that. Yeah, around court delays.
Yeah, it was regarding the court delays, is that correct? Yes, we did, and we have had a response. I'm trying to think. Mr. Edwards, would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think it was the leader of the council, wasn't it, who wrote to the Ministry of Justice asking about the judicial shortage in Nottinghamshire, and I think got a relatively positive response. That the judiciary is still understaffed, but there is a promise of another district judge has already started, and there's another one due to start. So I think hopefully through the Local Family Justice Board and working together, we'll be able to start progressing some of the backlog of the cases there.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Henry, I was just checking. We have actually seen that response. I think that only came through to the leader last week, possibly the week before. So if members would like, I can arrange for that response to actually be circulated to members if you would find that helpful. Yeah. Any other comments or observations? Councillor Welsh.
I was just wondering, in general, on a whole, from your perspective as chair, but also perhaps from an officer's perspective as well, how confident we feel in Nottinghamshire that we're doing okay with regards to our adoption figures and people are still coming forward with regards to adoption. Obviously, it's not only the right thing to do for many, many children, but also with regards to our budgets, it makes a massive difference with regards to keeping children in quite expensive care. So it's just really how confident we feel that we are progressing well, because certainly national trends are indicating that there has been quite a significant decline since the pandemic, and that's proving quite a challenge for a lot of local authorities across the country. So yeah, just be worth knowing what we think in Nottinghamshire with regards to that. Not a huge thing, but just in general, really.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. I'll offer my own view in the first instance because you asked how I feel as chair, and then I'll ask officers to comment in terms of performance and specifics. The report is for the year 2020-21, so it does represent a period when we were living through and with the pandemic. it does show a lot of positive statistics in terms of our performance and the numbers of children placed and matched. So to that extent, I have a reasonable degree of confidence in the way that our partnership agency is working and working in the best interests of the children. You can see through the report the number of panels, so we're still working at 5 a month, so we're working at pace. That hasn't sort of stopped and paused. There have been difficulties around doing it, but we are still working efficiently and effectively, in my opinion. If you look at the number of cases that Adoption East Midlands panels have heard, 221 over the year, which is a rise from the previous year. We've got 98 adoption applications, 3 adoption plans for relinquished children and 121 matches. So if I read the statistics within this reporting period, I would say that I have a degree of confidence in the way that we are performing. That is not to say that we ever stop focusing on doing what we're doing. And you're quite right to say that having children matched with families is the best outcome for them and not to be in care. Mr. Edwards, do you have anything to add, please?
No, I just echo that really. I think the move to Adoption East Midlands across the 4 D2N2 councils has been really successful. And we're also finding that we're placing more children now with extended family members through connected people, through special guardianship orders. So, you know, the pandemic's impacted on everything, actually, particularly trying to recruit foster carers. But I think we should be proud of what Adoption East Midlands has achieved, actually, during the last 18 months, because I think this is a very positive report.
Yeah, I know we also did put out some adverts for some extra capacity for safeguarding capacity across the county. How did that recruitment go? And have we got anything to say on that one?
Are we talking about adoption or fostering? You're getting ahead of me, aren't you? Yeah. I know you said you wanted me to move through the agenda quickly this morning. I'll come back to you on the next item. Mr. Pettigrew, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did, if I may, Chair. Just to add to Mr. Edwards' comments. Regional adoption is a central government drive. It has been for a number of years. Yeah, lead members across the East Midlands met with the adoption czar and said that it wasn't moving to a regional adoption model wasn't something that they would do unless it achieved better outcomes for children who needed adoption and better outcomes for those that wanted to adopt, and that it cost no more money. I can confirm that those 2 standards have been met with regards to the development of East Midlands adoption. Yeah, and I think that Mr. Edwards probably his humility stops him from actually saying it was Nottinghamshire County Council and Steve's leadership that has established a very, very effective and successful adoption agency on a D2N2 footprint. So I'm grateful to Steve's leadership for that.
And I would echo those thanks. Are there any more comments on this item? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you very much. Just going through the document, I notice in paragraph 12 it mentions the Adoption Support Fund. It's obviously the emergency funding released to provide help meet the needs of the families during the pandemic. Now through 12, 13, 14 going on, there's a few examples of what this money was accessed to provide support for, guardianship orders, specialist support groups, bulk purchasing of packages. I was just wondering if we knew financially directly how much money we'd accessed through the support fund, and if, obviously, 'cause it's quite soon for me, having seen the papers coming on as a substitute, if I could just be provided with a more, I suppose, robust picture of what this money was used to provide for families during this period. And basically for you, Chair, I'd be interested in your comments if you think there's any positive lessons that we can learn through this from the pandemic, and whether an extension of the Adoption Support Fund might be something that it would be worth this committee pushing for into the future.
Thank you. Mr Edwards, would you like to comment on how...
Yeah,
how
I
the
don't
money
know
was
how
spent?
much we got from the Adoption Support Fund during the pandemic or how much extra, but I can get that information for you, and I can also let you know which particular therapies we used, although there will be a wide range of them depending on the needs of the individual children and the families. So we can get that information for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Edwards. In respect of your question directed to me, I think I would reserve comment until I understand what's been spent and on what sort of therapies. But I would also make the comment that there is adoption support in normal times. This was specific to the particular circumstances for some families during the pandemic. So there is adoption support under normal times. I'd just like to hear also from Mr Edwards as to what specific things we felt were necessary in the last few months. So if that's all comments on this item, can I take us to the vote? You've heard the recommendations. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. The next item is Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report for the year 2020 to 21. There is one recommendation on page 17 of your papers, which I move.
And I second that, Chair, and I reserve the right to speak on this item.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have any questions and comments on this report? Councillor Meakin, you got your hand up faster, but I will come back to you, Councillor Henry. Councillor Meakin.
Point one, sorry, sir. Point 1 of 2 of the appendix covers children in poverty. While impacting on every child in the country, COVID-19 has a particular impact on children and young people already living in poverty in Nottinghamshire. The amount of children aged 10 to 17 living in a household with a problem debt increased dramatically.
Councillor Meakin, I think you may well also be ahead of yourself.
We're running, aren't we?
We're on the safeguarding partnership item 5. I think you were so keen to get ahead of Councillor Henry there that you've galloped to number 7.
That's right, it's there, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, my apologies.
That's fine. Councillor Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned earlier on in the last, I know we had a sort of recruitment drive to get more like foster carers and so on around into the county. How did we get on last time? I know we had a big recruitment drive. How did we get on with that? Is there any news on how many people recruited and whether or not there is the capacity for safeguarding in the county is now better than it was when we reported last time?
Mr Edwards, please. Thank you.
Yeah, we constantly have a really strong recruitment drive for social workers, social work assistants, people to work in children's social care. We chair a teaching partnership again across the D2N2 area of East Midlands, and we work really closely with the 3 universities, University of Nottingham, Nottingham Trent and the University of Derbyshire. And we've managed over the last sort of 3-4 years to double the number of student social work placements that we offer, which has put us in a position now where we are able to recruit a high number of social work, newly qualified social workers. I think there was something like 50 odd social workers that have started this year. So that does put us in a much better position, and particularly moving forward. The challenge that we've got at the minute is those social workers that have been appointed over the last 2 years have worked in unprecedented times, really. You can't really learn social work properly from your spare bedroom or your kitchen. You need to be sort of in the team and learning the job from those people who have got sort of more experience and knowledge and skill than you have, so that you can develop your craft, if you like. So, but we're really confident that we retain those those newly qualified workers, and over the next couple of years, we start to develop their skills and their experience. So I think the recruitment's been really, really positive, really good.
Councillor Henry, you want to come back?
Just a bit around the effectiveness of the leadership within safeguarding from the partners that we have. I know some reports back there were some issues again about whether or not we were effective in how we move forward in terms of the leadership within that. And is that similar, or is it changing, or is it any better?
I think it's difficult to know what particular area that you're talking about. I think there has been an issue about the number of referrals that are made to the MASH that aren't necessarily safeguarding referrals. And Lawrence and I have met with our partners, and Lawrence, whose role is the chair of the Safeguarding Partnership Executive Group, has written to partners with clear expectations. And we've got training lined up for partners. So again, we're hoping for improvements in that area. I don't know if Lawrence wants to sort of add anything.
Yes, we'll do that. So I wrote to all partners, apart from schools, who I'm going to write to this week, just in relation to MASH referrals. We had a meeting of the Safeguarding Assurance and Improvement Group a few weeks back and reached agreement that really we should be moving to a point where agencies challenge themselves to get their referrals down to a rate where only 20% of them need no further action. So they should be committing themselves to have a look really at what's happening in their organisations so that the vast majority of the referrals that they put through to the MASH, the contacts that they make, are ones that actually require action. Within that, there's a few things that we've been trying to unpick, really. The degree to which information is simply passed to the MASH with an expectation that the MASH will then use that as some kind of intelligence in order to form a picture of what's happening for children. That isn't the role of the MASH. It's not the way the MASH has been set up. It doesn't have the capacity or infrastructure for being an intelligence-based organisation. It takes referrals for children who are at risk. And it's really for individual agencies to look across the range of information they have on children and to make the relevant referrals when they think children are at risk based on that information. So we are trying to be really clear with agencies about the role of the MASH, about trying to get them to move to a place where they are managing their safeguarding referrals in a better way. And some are managing them very well. Some of them have got real challenges which have been exacerbated, I think, during the pandemic and the pressure on staffing as well. So we do understand that, but what we're expecting is plans which the independent scrutineer is going to oversee, to start moving people back towards that direction and trying to get the number of NFAs and therefore the real pressure in the MASH, which has led in some cases to the social workers complaining they can't see the wood for the trees. There's so much stuff in there that it's difficult to actually understand therefore where the priorities lie because just the sheer weight of referrals.
Okay, Councillor Henry, yeah. Councillor Callaghan, you had a question.
I think it was the last Children and Young People's Committee that there was a recruitment drive, I believe, for the MASH because they were inundated with referrals. And basically, how's that going? Have you been able to recruit, Steve, or, you know, is that ongoing? Has it made a difference?
Yeah, we have made some progress with that. We have put people in. We've put experienced people from elsewhere in the council into the MASH because they know it, and we've backfilled some of the positions. And touch wood, at the moment, yes, it is making a positive difference, and the timescales and decision making in the MASH has improved. And we're continuing now, as we said we would in the last committee report, to look at systems and processes to make them as streamlined and as safe as we can do.
Okay, Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Anderson, you reserved your right to speak. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I did. I believe Lawrence has answered part of my question. I was just going to ask what has been done to try and mitigate the high number of contacts of the MASH from partners where the result is there's no further action taken. I wondered if you had anything else to add on that.
I mean, the other thing that we've done really is we've reiterated the fact to all partners that we've got good training available, online training for their staff on making MASH referrals, and we're encouraging them all again to make sure that staff are trained on making a good MASH referral. We've also said where we have cases that obviously don't meet threshold that are coming through to the MASH, that we will highlight them back to senior managers in the organisation, so they're really clear about some of the behaviours in their organisation that are putting pressure on the MASH unduly. So we've got a number of things going on, and as I say, we expect agencies to put in place their own action plans with Mark Peel, who's the independent scrutineer, overseeing those plans and talking to agencies. I will be writing to head teachers today that the issues in school are slightly different. In that we've got a dedicated advisor for schools in the MASH. The rates of no further action are not as high as they are for many other agencies. And we've also got this pilot that we're doing in terms of social worker supervision of some of the safeguarding leads in schools that we're just commencing as well. So there's a number of things with schools which give us a slight advantage that it will be interesting to evaluate how we might use those in relation more widely to how we manage kind of safeguarding risk more widely and therefore referrals to the MASH. So there's a lot going on. I think what we're going to have to do is keep close scrutiny on it in our Safeguarding Insurance Improvement Group meetings for coming months to make sure that actually things are actually being delivered rather than just talked about, and that we see the figures moving in the right direction and the pressure on the MASH alleviated.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor Anderson? Councillor Welsh, you indicated.
Yeah, for me, I've got 2 different points on 2 different things, because I wasn't actually going to talk about this section now, but I am going to say something now because I feel compelled to say something. Having known people that work in various organisations that do actually end up possibly referring people, children, to the MASH, what they often say to me is they often end up referring it to the MASH because they don't quite know, or there isn't those early intervention support services there as such before they get to that point. So they've got a children that they've identified. The situation has been exasperated because of the pandemic, and they haven't seen those people before they get to that point. They haven't seen the teacher, the form tutor every morning, or they've not seen the health visitor face to face as much. So the situation is going, and it's where they get those early interventionists before they get to high risk. So they feel as a key worker, I need to do something about this because I don't want this child to be at risk, and you don't want it on your shoulders as well. We've seen situations in the stories in national newspapers, etc., where perhaps, you know, certain people haven't reported when they should have. It's a huge responsibility. So it is a little bit of a concern and a bit of a plea. I know the government is talking about family hubs. I'd be really interested to see whether Nottinghamshire gets any of that, because I think that would significantly help us here in Nottinghamshire. But some of that early intervention work, which I think was around when we were doing the Common Assessment Framework, and all of those incentives, I think there's a bit of a lack of them there, and a bit of underfunding perhaps, and perhaps some acknowledgement of that would be, I think, really useful in how we go forward, in how we actually tackle the amount of referrals that goes to the match, is actually looking at what actually happens before we get to that position. And yeah, I think that would be really, really useful. So that's my first point. My second point is regards to page 37 of the Yellow Report, where it's you talk about the fact that you've done some training on child criminal exploitation and county lines. I really hope that I'm on the right report here. Yeah, I am. Phew. Okay. Child criminal exploitation in county lines. With another hat on, I do quite a lot of work with regards to human trafficking and child exploitation and county lines, and it's actually something over the years that I've become to be quite very, very passionate about, especially after hearing many harrowing stories. I think it's fabulous that you're doing this. I was just wondering, it says it's about a multi-agency training, whether this is going to be expanded perhaps into schools. School staff could actually access this. Youth workers as well, I think, would find this particularly useful. And I'll say this again, there are some statistics in Nottinghamshire that point to the fact that 15 to 16-year-old young women I refer them to are most at risk of sexual exploitation. It was up there in the 90-something% in Nottinghamshire. They were the most likely at risk of sexual exploitation, and that's what was happening. And I'd really welcome some work with regards to empowering young women in schools and targeting some of those vulnerable children about how we ensure that actually they don't, as much as possible, they feel empowered to kind of walk away from these situations, as well as actually dealing with those culprits as well. So that would be a bit of a plea, whether perhaps as a committee there is something somewhere where we could do some work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Lawrence, would you like to pick up what you can, and then I'll add some commentary in a moment?
Yes, can do. Thank you. So just to be really clear around the pathways that we've got, we have a document that explains the thresholds for our different services, including the kind of child protection services that are accessed through the MASH. And we've published that now for the last 10 or 11 years with regular updates. That's the pathway to provision, which makes it very clear in most cases when it should be a MASH referral and where a referral should go elsewhere. We've got a dedicated early help unit, which is a kind of telephone line and able to take referrals for those where agencies look at the pathway to provision and they know that a case doesn't actually need a child protection social worker's response, but there is some help. And that early help unit links back through our family service, through our children's centre service network, and through a number of voluntary agencies and health partners as well, in order to provide some of that early help. So I think that there is clear pathways. I think sometimes people's automatic reaction is to phone the MASH rather than referring to the pathway to provision, working out where the referral should accurately go, and actually perhaps using either the early help unit or some of those local early help services first. So that's one of the challenges that we've got. I think it's an easy message to say if you're worried about a child, phone the MASH. I think to try and unpack actually where the best place is to go to help is where we're trying to make sure that agencies are doing what they should do and make sure that their staff know the right place to refer to. Just in relation to the criminal exploitation and county lines work, that training will be available to any of the partners involved in the safeguarding partnership, so that will include schools and youth workers. We're doing work online, so it's really easy and cheap to access that training for agencies. Some training we're still doing face-to-face on the more complicated, sensitive subjects where we need to, but a lot of this, certainly in terms of need to raise awareness amongst a great number of people about the risks, things they should be looking out for, is widely available, and we're really proud actually of the training offer that we've got across the partnership. Just picking up on CSE and some of the work in schools, we're quite lucky in Nottinghamshire in that we've got a tackling emerging threats team that is funded partly by the schools, and certainly CSE and looking for CSE hotspots and doing work directly into schools is one of the things that they are doing and have been doing. I guess that the world has changed slightly during the pandemic, and we're trying to work out how much it will return to the way it was before and what that team needs to do now in order to work with schools to keep people safe. So it's certainly something that's under constant review about thinking about how they work best with schools as the world changes around us.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I think the comments I'd make, Lawrence has partly referred to, I think it's really important to remember that the safeguarding partnership is just that. It is not simply us as local authority. It is partners in health and the police. Some would say, and I would probably support the notion, that it seems rather odd that schools are not one of the statutory partners. And I think if you wind the clocks back to the pre-academy days, when the local authority was also the lead education authority, it was a simpler time in terms of that input from schools possibly, which doesn't exist now with the academy system because the academies are all separate entities. So the statutory partners are health, police and ourselves as local authority. It was said at the recent SAGE meeting that Mr Jones referred to, one of the Safeguarding Partnerships sub-meetings. The comment was made and stressed that the MASH is not other. The MASH is of the partnership. So whilst we as local authority do have that lead role, we staff it, we run it, there's a police presence in there, there's a health presence in there, nothing like the scale that we have there. And I think we are still moving in our own way of processing and dealing with the MASH. we and our partners are still moving from the time when it was a partnership board and we were the single lead with partners involvement to the three-legged stool that we now have. And I think we are still probably in a transitional phase whilst the partnership is well established and partners grasp what their responsibilities are and that they are equal to ours. I think that we are still working to them fully grasping that and fully embracing it, and there is still a tendency to treat the MASH as other. So there's a lot of work with officers going on about that. It isn't simply another service that you can tap into. I think it's also important with this report to look at the whole of the Safeguarding Partnerships work. It isn't simply about the MASH. So I picked out, for instance, the priorities that are on page 39, and even if we look at them distilled to just three priorities, you know, to understand and develop the role of the Safeguarding Partnership in evolving system arrangements, I'd say that very much is what I've just spoken of, that the MASH is not other. We are three equal partners. We must all shoulder a burden together. Priority 2 is preventing abuse and neglect. Again, that is how we all observe and support children across the county. Not all of them will be involved with us as a local authority. And priority 3 about improving safeguarding practice. So we talk about things like rapid review and thematic analysis. So for instance, some work which may well be delivered through, could be through Children's Centre Services, it could be through health partners, that might be about co-sleeping and the dangers of co-sleeping, because we've seen child deaths through that. So there's lots of different things going on. And the other thing I particularly pulled out was pages 42-43, which is the scrutineer's overview, so Dr. Mark Peel's overview of how our partnership functions and what its challenges are. You know, and he picks out 4 points here: our completion of rapid reviews and the local child safeguarding practice reviews, which we do very well. We're recognised nationally as doing well and appropriately, and Dr. Peel comments on that. He references specifically the challenges of COVID. He references the effectiveness of the executive of the partnership. So I think coming back to Councillor Henry's question about leadership, Dr. Peel is challenging. He does challenge us. He has the confidence and the access to challenge appropriately, in my view, and does so. And he suggests that the executive is effective in discharging its duties. And he also goes on in point 4 to comment on his own actions in the past year in engaging with police and health colleagues in different ways. He recognises challenges for the future. Children placed in residential schools and unregulated homes, so some of the things that Mr. Edwards spoke about in terms of an earlier comment. So there is a lot more in this report than simply our focus on the MASH. I think probably that's all I have to say. Do I have any other comments and queries on the report at this time? No, in which case, can I move us to the vote? All of those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. We have an item on the agenda for foster carers. Mr. Edwards, do we have any foster care items to bring today? Thank you. So I'm going to item 7 now, which is the report on child poverty and the impact of COVID. There are 3 recommendations at page 52, which I move.
And I second those, Chair.
Thank you. And I think this is item 7, child poverty. So, Councillor Meakin, is this where your question sits? So can I move to Councillor Callaghan first? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Can hear me without it anyway. Paragraph 22, page 47. Obviously, in a 6-week period, you sent out a consultation for families. Over that 6-week period, you had 86 responses from 7 districts. That was 26 organisations involved in that. I find that a little bit disappointing that we've only got a small number that have come back from that consultation period. And the majority of the respondents on page 48, 23, they were in employment or they'd got a partner in employment. So there was no families that weren't employed, so probably a lot more poverty than that's going in there. And then for me, that was a little bit disappointing, if I'm honest.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. Do you have anything to add, or can I ask officers to comment on the levels of response? Do you have anything to add, Councillor Callaghan, or can I ask officers to respond?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Could I ask you to switch your mic off now then, so that officers can... Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we did try, as we do with all consultation, to try and get as many people as possible to respond to it, and that was us sharing it as an online tool, but also giving out hard copies and then getting people to update it into the system so that we could do the analysis. As with any consultation, it will clash with consultation taking place. So we were already consulting in terms of the big survey, the NOT survey. So we think, and quite rightly, people prioritise that survey. And we did get some information from that as well. So yes, you're right. You know, we would have loved to have had far more families who were in unemployment responding. But you know, we will just continue to keep trying when we consult. And again, I think partly because some services weren't doing face-to-face work as much at the time, which impacted as well, we think.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson, you indicated.
Thank you. I want to comment specifically between paragraphs 7 and 9, which cover the significant rise in the free school meal claimants across the county. Seems quite clear throughout this, to paraphrase a previous member of this committee, I believe, who said it was a cause for celebration almost when some of this comes up. It is actually quite clearly a cause for immense concern. The figures in the paragraph state that the number of children claiming free school meals in April 2020 was 19,783 compared with 23,649 in April 2021. Which shows a 19.5% increase, I believe, if my maths are right. However, in light realising that I was coming to this committee, a member of the council was kind enough to furnish me with the latest figures up to October. And as of October 2021, this figure is actually 25,511 claimants, which is a rise of roughly 1,800 more in just the last 6 months since figures we're looking at. So that makes this, what, a 33% increase since the start of the pandemic, and it shows quite clearly that an increase in child poverty is rising despite the easing of lockdown here. And I have all the latest figures for all the boroughs if anybody wants them afterwards. But specifically here is right mine. Here Ashfield is now up to 5,346 free school claimants. Mansfield's up to 4,755 new claimants. Both remain the highest and have both seen the highest percentage increases. To find those very interesting. Also, I've got to say that in paragraph 8, it uses the line, "It is unclear, however, if these families were eligible for free school meals prior to the pandemic and chose not to claim previously." That is, for me personally, that is hugely frustrating. It seems quite generalistic and assumptive. You know, at no point does it really report what we should be doing here and investigate why these parents didn't claim before. No parent ever chooses to leave the child to go hungry. Anybody in this room with children will know that. And I feel a simple look at things like the universal credit rates could have answered that question. what we're doing as a council to identify those are these claimants which are fresh claimants, not people that have fallen off and come back on, and what we're doing to try and address the broader reasons why they're having to apply for this lifeline now.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. For what it's worth, I actually share some of your frustration and confusion about the stats that come through. My penciled notes near paragraph 9, which is about take-up of free school meals in terms of children at primary and secondary phase, and I've noticed, is this down to the return to school? Are we looking at previous, have the numbers gone up simply because that was the point in time when it wasn't just the vulnerable children and children of key workers who were at school, it was the universal reopening of schools. So was this down to that reopening? Was it previously unclaimed or new eligibilities? So lots of questions about that. I will ask officers to comment. My belief, my understanding is that the mechanisms for reporting don't allow us to be able to work out what the reasons are in some cases. So I will ask officers to clarify that and also to clarify what we can do to press if that is indeed the case and how we can actually try and get better data. But I do know we're sometimes limited by the reporting streams. So if you wouldn't mind commenting, please, Irene.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, it's an interesting one when it comes to families who are eligible for free school meals. We try our best to encourage families to take it up. However, it's often done through, so obviously it's an online process. It's managed by our admissions team, but it's the schools that will have information, not the county council, about which children are eligible. And sometimes schools won't have that. So it's very much dependent on a family knowing that free school meals is available for them to claim. I mean, I know recently, having managed the COVID support grant in terms of free school meal provision over the school holidays, that there were parents phoning up going, well, how do I claim? I'm on universal credit. So we've tried really hard to try and promote that. Schools have struggled for years to get families to access free school meals and actually claim it, even though they're eligible. Sometimes that's about stigma, sometimes it's about a lack of awareness, but schools are desperate for them to claim. With every child that does claim, the school will also receive pupil premium, so it brings income into the school to support that child. So you will understand, everybody wants these families to claim if they're eligible. We have seen an increase. We don't know, I mean, in terms of the eligibility, as I've said, so we can't compare those two figures, but it's positive that people are claiming if they're eligible. Some of this is about universal credit and obviously unemployment. We've seen from the paper, and this is an issue nationally, not just locally. We do know we need to do more to encourage families to claim. We know that things like provision over the school holidays has raised the awareness, and we've had families phone up and say, well, my neighbour's got this, why can't I have it? And that's a positive thing. So it's partly promotion. Obviously, levels of unemployment have gone up because of COVID. Hopefully that will recover. We know there's lots of vacancies around, but, time will tell. And there's a lot more that we need to be doing with schools to try and encourage that. But the information is very much held by schools rather than the county council now. So it's just one of those things. Have I answered your question there? Is there anything I've missed?
No, I think you've largely addressed the points made, although just on a personal point, if I may, I appreciate that from a financial aspect, it may be better for the schools when more kids do apply for free school meals, but I think any indication that kids applying for free school meals is a good thing is probably a rather damning indictment of the state of the rest of society. If that's a position we're getting to where that's a good thing.
And I think it's probably more appropriate for me to comment than officers on that. I don't think any officer is suggesting that it is seen universally as a good thing, simply that when people who are eligible choose not to claim, there is a lot of other support that is also forfeit, and therefore it has to be seen as positive when the claims are actually made by those who are eligible. Councillor Welsh, you indicated.
Right, where to start? First of all, I am slightly disappointed in this report. I think the evidence speaks for itself with regards to child poverty in this country and in Nottinghamshire. So if we just take the pandemic out of the situation and say the pandemic never happened, child poverty in Nottinghamshire has been rising significantly since 2010 and before. So even if we didn't have the pandemic, the truth is child poverty is rising. And what is significantly rising and continues to rise in Nottinghamshire, and there are evidence of this across the country, is in work poverty as well, where one parent is actually working and that child is in poverty. I will be pragmatic about this in the sense that I don't believe that the government hasn't done anything to combat what's happened during the pandemic. I think that it has put things in place to try and avoid certain children going into poverty. So I'm being pragmatic about it. But I do think this is still a massive issue. And I feel, and I will be corrected if I'm wrong, and no doubt, Councillor Taylor, you will correct me, is that it seems to skirt a little bit over the issue. So if I just, even before the pandemic, 4.3 million children were living in poverty in this country. That was up 200,000 from the previous year and 500,000 from the previous 5 years. Food bank access in Gedling alone has risen dramatically, especially for children. The families that are now accessing food banks in the area that I represent has risen dramatically. If you talk to head teachers about levels of poverty and in-work poverty, it is clear to see that poverty is on the rise and it is getting worse. If you speak to health visitors, they will tell you what the impact is having on young children and young families. Yes, of course we have to rely on government data. Of course we have statistics. But I'd be interested to know how many head teachers, how many health visitors, how many food banks, people have visited to actually get some of that on-the-ground information with regards to what's actually happening in our communities with regards to children. Because I have a real concern here that there's a political ideology that is reflected actually in this report, and that's a bit that's disappointing, because the fact of the matter remains, it is predicted, and the government have been quite open about what's going to happen in Nottinghamshire. Children eligible for pupil premium is on the way up. Food bank usage of children and families in Nottinghamshire is up dramatically. Free school meals, whether they were able to access before or not, is by the by. There are families that are feeling that they need free school meals more than ever. So whether they were eligible before or not and never applied, the fact is they're now in a situation where they feel they really, really need it. And I feel child poverty is a huge issue for Nottinghamshire. I think we skirted over it a little bit, to be honest. I feel quite frustrated with regards to this report. And I think it's about time, perhaps, this local authority had some kind of summit or brought people together with regards to child poverty, because I don't think this report is doing children any justice in Nottinghamshire. And I'm sorry that I've had to be quite frank about it, and I think this is probably one of the times, Councillor Taylor, where me and you will disagree, and that's okay, that's what we're here to do. But I do think this is a massive issue, and I think when we have paragraphs in here saying, we can't really tell whether the pandemic's had an impact on child poverty. Well, I should say, when the next lot of data comes out for Nottinghamshire, I will put my house on the fact that child poverty in Nottinghamshire would have risen. And it would have risen in Gedling, and it would have risen in Mansfield, and it would have risen in every area of Nottinghamshire. And I think we just need to take it a little bit more seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. I will disagree with you on two specific points. One is your presumption about what I think and feel that potentially puts you and I on the opposite side of a debate when faced with the same report. And the other thing I will disagree with you about is that this report is politically framed. This report has been compiled by officers based on the data available to them and the mechanisms of reporting that they have available to them. And I will put my house on the integrity and professionalism of the officer corps at this council in presenting reports in a proper fashion irrespective of which political administration is currently sitting on the corridor on the first floor. So we disagree on those 2 points, Councillor Welsh.
Point of order, I've never questioned the integrity of any officer at this county council. What I've said is there are certain things that aren't in this report that I feel should be in that report.
Councillor Welsh.
Thank you.
Thank you. The report has been compiled by officers and is being received by elected members. The report has not been tampered with, nor would this administration choose to tamper with any report. The report is what it is. Now, in terms of the content of the report, I agree also it is incredibly frustrating when we're left saying we can't conclude from the data that what has happened is because of cause X, particularly COVID. But the fact is we cannot currently make a direct correlation of cause and effect, not least frustrated by the fact that the last round of data available is 2018-19. So frustratingly, again, we will sit here in a year looking at the data from 2019-20 whilst we all know and hear what is going on around the county and particularly in our own divisional areas. So lots of frustration in many ways. Councillor Meakin, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I've read this report and it's on the lines with what Councillor Walsh has said about the child poverty. It's on the rise in the county. In my division in Kirkby, it has rocketed in areas like Coxmoor and Kingsway Estate. It doesn't take a detective to understand the free school meal claimants and unemployment benefits are the biggest indicator of poverty. As this in the indices of deprivation that clearly places like Ashfield and Mansfield at the top. Can I ask that a report on the child poverty emergency that exists in this county, an evidence-based report, comes to the committee at the earliest opportunity, based on not around the impact of COVID, but deprivation as a whole?
Thank you, Councillor Meakin. I think we do have regular child poverty updates, and I'll defer to officers to comment. I think this is something that we have. This particular report was sought by Councillor Liz Plant when she was still here, so before the election. And there was also some request that we did look at the impact of COVID. So we have this combined report now on the basis that this was the earliest date at which any data about COVID was starting to feed in a meaningful fashion. I will just ask officers to comment, please, Irene, about the frequency with which we see these reports. Thank you.
Yes, we do have, and I think it was July now, sorry, I have to refer back to the paper, a report to this committee about the child poverty statistics, which, you know, are out of date, as the Chair has confirmed. We have an action plan that will come to committee each year, and that's what was agreed at the previous committee when we talked about child poverty. We have a strategic group called the Improving Life Chances for Children and Families Partnership. I know it's a mouthful, but that is the group that focuses on child poverty. Every district council is on that group. We've got the voluntary sector on there. We have all sorts of representatives. I think the membership is like 30, 40 people. They don't all come to every single meeting, but the network is strong. Child poverty and that group in particular has been meeting since we had the national duty to have a Child Poverty Act. Lots of local authority areas didn't bother when that statutory duty had gone. They didn't bother with carrying on with the child poverty partnerships that they had in place and action plans. In Nottinghamshire we did. It is difficult to tackle the impact of child poverty and child poverty levels. That's something that, you know, there's lots of things that could happen nationally that will help us locally. So our focus is very much about, you know, supporting employment. So we've got Job Centre Plus that are very active members of the group. We've got Futures who are around youth employment. So lots and lots of people are involved. The passion is there, and we will be coming back to this group on an annual basis, and that's what was agreed at committee. If people want information prior to that, you know, we're happy to provide briefings. We have a web page as well with lots of reports. I do recommend people look at the web page. Okay.
Thank you, Irene. Mr. Pettigrew, did you want to comment?
If I may, Chair, yeah, and to members, and particularly draw members' attention to, I think it's paragraph 29. Yeah, with regards to, because I want to say something about officers, yeah, and I want to say something about my gratitude and thanks to officers. Yeah, so on the 7th of October, yeah, Nottinghamshire County Council was informed of the grant that they would receive that would allow them, if they chose to provide free school meal vouchers over the school holidays. Those school holidays, because we had 2 weeks of half term this time, started in 6 working days. Yeah. But the officer leading this, which is actually my colleague has just spoken, yeah, didn't work 6 working days. She worked Saturday and Sunday and every evening the following week to ensure that 25,000 children had free school meal vouchers over October half term. Yeah. That was above and beyond, yeah, what I expected from her. Yeah. And it was above and beyond actually what her direct line manager was concerned, yeah, might have an impact, yeah, on her. But she did that because she was passionate about it. She did that because she wanted to ensure that children were fed over that time. Yeah, and I'm proud, yeah, that we achieved that in very short change, yeah, to achieve that our schools ensured that 25,000 vouchers for £30 each were provided within a few working days. Yeah. And I think that isn't something that I'm celebrating, yeah, but it is something that I'm immensely proud of.
Thank you, Mr Pettigrew. Councillor Henry.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I echo what Colin has said towards the staff, and thank you very much. But there's a point I just need to raise as well about the cost of living crisis that we have at the moment that will have an impact on child poverty. For example, we're having the rising cost of fuel, gas, food, and all that will have an impact on that. How has that been addressed here?
That's for we politicians, really, isn't it, rather than the officers? Yeah. Suddenly a forest of hands. No. The report before us, and I will pull us back to the report because I have allowed quite a wide debate. Councillor Smith. I have allowed quite a wide debate. If you look at the report that's before us and the purposes of this report, were to share the findings of the recent review on the impact of COVID, were to seek approval to allocate the funds from the Household Support Fund, and we are to seek approval for the transfer of responsibility for the remainder of the Household Support Fund going forward, because the funds that Mr Pettigrew referenced as being announced first half of October are to be spent between now and the end of March. So this is an ongoing funding stream in order to support those vulnerable families. So I suppose in the first instance, Councillor Henry, I would answer with that our immediate focus going forward, with the help of the funding that's come from government for this particular purpose, is still there. We are focused on it, and I guess we keep attempting to address it with each new week, with each new month, and with each new circumstance. Councillor Lee, you indicated.
Chairman, thank you very much. I've only been a councillor for 4 months now, and to see the hard work of our officers that was highlighted by Mr Pettigrew, sorry, I wasn't sure the title, is unbelievable. Is every single councillor here, no matter what your political persuasion, you get involved in politics for the right reasons to help people. And the one thing that has made me utmost proud from across the colour prescription of political parties is everybody here is here for the right reasons. And I'd like to say thank you to the officers. I don't think we were aware that officers are working 7 days a week to help our children and our communities. And I'd just like to thank you for that, and thank you for bringing our attention to that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yeah, and I take that also, that I'm remiss in not having recognised officers' efforts earlier. Councillor Smith, you indicated. Would you switch your mic off, Councillor Lee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Errol, I'm going to defend the government a little bit, if I may. This report details exactly what Notts County Council can do. And I think page 52 details exactly what we are doing. And I think that £2.3 million of new household support fund is to be welcomed. But your question, Errol, is around what we're doing with what are we doing to fill the gap? And I don't think that's a conversation for this committee, but you've asked it. I'll detail what the government are doing. So in addition to what's detailed on page 26, a £500 million household grant support scheme's been announced by the government. That is to help with bills such as energy costs or food. So that's helping the cost of living. You may have listened to the news over the past week. We are increasing the national living wage near the £10 of what your party were calling for, but then didn't call for, but do still want, I think. And we are cutting the universal credit taper, which will give a tax cut to hard-working families, which Councillor Welsh mentioned. And all that put together with what we're asking councillors to endorse today will help with the cost of living crisis that some claim exists.
Councillor Smith, I'm not sure if there's a thank you in there or not, because we've gone way outside what I did try to bring us back to. On which note, I am going to bring us back to the vote for the particular paper which is in front of us. So we have 3 recommendations on page 52. Do I have support for that, please? All of those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimously carried. Right. We have a lot of business before us. We're an hour in already. Councillor Owen would be heartily ashamed of my timekeeping. So we are going to move on a little bit, please. Item 8 is the Child Obesity Trailblazer update and tackling food insecurity. I will ask members when debating this particular item to focus on the papers in front of us, those which we're considering, in order that we can get through the rest of the business. So you have 2 recommendations on pages 61 and 62, which I move. Do I have a seconder?
I second those, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Comments, Councillor Welsh.
I just think this is absolutely brilliant. I think Nottinghamshire should be really, really proud of this work, quite personally. I think it is addressing inequalities. I think it's a really good report. I think it's been well evaluated, and I think the way in which it's being carried out is second to none. So actually, I think, yeah, well, you know, on behalf perhaps of us here at the Labour Group, we just want to say that we think this is absolutely fantastic, and yeah, well done everybody that's been involved. It's a fantastic piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Any other comments or questions from members? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Chair. I completely echo what Councillor Welsh said. I think it's a brilliant report, ignoring some of the problems that we've discussed earlier that families in poverty face. Cooking healthy meals is something that gets hugely expensive. Ingredients become more expensive compared to, say, just buying ready meals from Aldi or Iceland or something like that. And parents are facing a difficult choice at the time. So I welcome the work, and I welcome the fact that we've got funding and that there's a plan here. And yeah, absolutely brilliant piece. Thank you.
I noticed that we have Stephanie Morrissey on screen. I don't know if you want to come in with any comments on this one, Stephanie. I think this has been a lot of your work.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies I can't be there in person today. But yes, a big thank you to those comments. We are extremely proud of what we've achieved over the last 2 and a bit years in Nottinghamshire. We're really proud that we are one of only 5 trailblazers in the country, and have worked really hard on this. And a special thanks to colleagues in early years and children's services for their continued partnership working on this. And certainly, Councillor Williamson, I do echo your observation around cooking healthy meals from scratch and the challenge that families do face. And so I can assure you that over the next 8 months of the continued work of the grant funding and then beyond, we'll be very much focusing on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, that's appreciated. Councillor Lee.
Chairman, thank you. I've looked through the report. It may be in there, but I can't see it. Are we still, is it on the curriculum about teaching children how to cook at schools and healthy cooking at schools? Because I know the earlier we start with this, children will take things at home and learn at home. It's something that used to be learned in the 80s and 70s in school, not so much now from what I hear.
Irene, would you like to respond?
I'm not sure, if I'm honest with you, but we will certainly go and check. Stephanie may know. But yes.
Stephanie,
see.
do you have an answer to that?
Not specifically, no. I agree it was very much done in the 80s when I was at school. But I know it's something that we are really mindful of, but actually not necessarily in formal schooling from the age of sort of 4.5, 5, but actually in early years, and getting children used to working with food and being around foods, etc., from as early as possible.
Thank you. Just to observe for members that Marion Clay, who would normally be with us, is not here today. She's not very well. She has the education lead and would have had an answer probably for us on that, so we can come back with an answer, you know, in general terms, Councillor Lee. I suppose I would add, when I know I'm quite old, but when I was at school it was home economics, it wasn't cookery, which interestingly probably embraced some of the other elements that the programme's been trying to touch, which is about budgeting, choosing ingredients from scratch and actually making fresh meals. So I'm not giving my age away, but it's over 21. Any more questions? Oh, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just a question on recommendation 2. Does that include the continuation of the healthier at-home meal kit scheme? Because I think that's brilliant. You know, the saying is, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach them to fish, they'll eat for life. And I think there's only 10 people been in part of that, paragraph 26 says, of that pilot so far. But I think if we can extend that, you're actually extending the ability for people to take home and then create the meals that we've taught them to. So 10 out of 317 isn't a lot so far, but I just wondered if recommendation 2 does enable you as the officers to continue that and expand it. If not, then let's try and add that in.
Would you like to answer, Stephanie? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. And yeah, you're interested in the Healthier at Home meal scheme. It's one of our sort of prize outcomes of so far with the Trailblazer. Yes, absolutely. That recommendation does cover the continuation and development of that particular aspect of our work.
Thank you. So with that affirmation, can I move us to the vote on this item? All of those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Do you have any more items, Stephanie? I've just gone off screen.
I don't, Chair, no, so I shall bid you farewell.
Thank you. Item 9 is the childcare sufficiency assessment in the early years and childcare sector in Nottinghamshire. There is one recommendation on page 77, which I move.
And I second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have any questions or observations? Councillor Meakin.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 19A lists to a recommendation to target businesses and sustainability supporting for providers who are concerned about the viability in areas of higher levels of disadvantage and where vulnerable children would be adversely affected if there is no provision available. Is there a map of provision available so we can identify areas where provision is poor or non-existent? I'd like to thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Interestingly, the report found that there isn't at the moment any area where there isn't sufficient childcare. The issue that we've got would be that those businesses in those most disadvantaged areas failing because people aren't taking up the childcare. What we've got at the moment is vacancies in those areas, and that makes the business less viable. So our priority at the moment is to encourage families to take up their childcare entitlements in those areas. If they don't, that's when the risk is that childcare organisations may close. But what we do have, obviously, is always we will always have schools early years provision if we needed to in those areas. The problem with school provision is it isn't always available at the times that families need it. But again, in most disadvantaged areas, you've got a mixture of unemployed families, you've got working families. So again, it's meeting the needs of the community really in those areas. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Irene. Councillor Callaghan.
How many of these providers support children with SEND? And do we work with these providers to support them with the children with SEND?
Yeah, thank you. Every early years provider will have an area, will have a SENCO role, so they will be responsible for supporting children with SEND within an early years setting. That is a statutory duty. The vast majority of our early years providers, both in schools but also in the private, voluntary and independent sector, will support children with SEND. Often children are diagnosed in those years as well. So the early years team that I'm responsible for have an area SENCO role, so they bring those early years settings together to discuss cases, share good practice and so on. But we also have the SFSS programme. Don't ask me what that stands for again, because I've totally forgotten. Schools, families, specialist services. So we also have that team who will go in and support each child within those settings. So we think we've got a really good setup in terms of supporting children with SEND.
Do you think there's some wriggle room with academies? Purely because, you know, on a level that I'm working with families, I have had some academy chains not taken children with SEND.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Callaghan, you're talking therefore about the early years units and not in the mainstream education. Thank you.
We can certainly pick that up. I'm not aware of that, but that's something we would always encourage any early years provider, no matter what part of the sector that they are inclusive, and that's certainly something that Ofsted would look at as well.
So can I suggest, if you've got specific instances of that, Councillor Callaghan, that you simply refer those through to officers so that that can be looked at? Thank you. Councillor Welsh, you had a question.
Yeah, I think this report's fantastic. Again, I don't think we can ever underestimate how important childcare provision is for our economy alone. It's often an area that perhaps doesn't get the attention it needs from outside of authorities, but it's actually vitally important. And I would like to place on record, especially from my own personal experience, where my little boy did go to a childcare setting for one day a week for the pure fact that he could mix with other children, because he wasn't getting that. The way that establishment, and I know many nurseries and childminders across Nottinghamshire that have worked throughout the pandemic, what they've done in order to keep staff and children safe and enabling parents to go to work. The majority of children, I think actually parents in my little boy's nursery were literally all key workers. So they were NHS workers. You'd see them with their NHS badges, and that was enabling them to do what was so vitally important. So they've had such a critical role. Yeah, and I just think they've been absolutely amazing, and they don't always get the praise necessarily that they deserve. So that's the first thing. The first thing I think the other thing I think with regards to this sufficiency assessment, it's quite reassuring with regards to we have got enough places across Nottinghamshire. There is an issue which I think again is a national issue with regards to childcare settings in areas of deprivation, and that's been going on I think since when the previous Labour government, a long time ago, it was a Labour government, I do remember it, when they introduced children's centres, and the idea was to have some affordable childcare within children's centres, and even that was a real challenge, wasn't it, to keep those going. I know because I worked in that field for many years. So I think there is an issue, but apart from that, I think this is a really good report. I think it's really, really useful for us to be able to see it. The one other thing that I do want to address though is about, I do think, for example, there is a lot of high quality. I do think that I've been even shocked myself by how much my little boys come on by having the opportunity to be around people other than me, if that makes sense, and how good his language is developing, etc., because of other professionals being involved. But the question that I do have is with regards to the affordability element. So I'm definitely in support of the fact that certain two-year-olds can get the free childcare, they can get the free hours when there are 3-year-olds. I don't think that the childcare settings are charging too much, but I think there is a disparity between what parents can afford and what those childcare settings are having to charge. They're having to charge that to break even. Some are really struggling, and I think there is a disparity there, and I think some parents, a lot of parents actually really struggle to pay with childcare for childcare provision, and actually it works out that the majority of, for example, it does often you know, half of at least one's salary is going on childcare. So that's one point. The other point is there's another element to this, and I didn't realise this until I signed my child up to nursery, but there is something that you can claim with regards to 20% back with regards to your childcare. And I was just wondering if as a county council we could do a bit of a drive on that on social media, because actually people often choose their childcare, not often, but if there's a choice between two outstanding settings and one charges a little less or etc., that can be quite influential. But there is an element where parents can claim back the 20%, and I didn't know that until I'd signed my child up. It wouldn't have stopped me from doing it, but actually it was a really welcome thing. But I was just wondering whether that might encourage more people to take up those extra days of childcare. And last but not least, and I'm sorry to go on there because I do feel quite passionate about this, the other thing is to recognise the fact of the family networks and the involvement that they're having in childcare. That is on the rise more and more and more. And I think, whilst I think that's a really great thing, and I know my little boy loves his day with his mama and his pops, for some people they're having to choose that rather than a childcare setting because of affordability. And so it would be interesting to know what those levels are in Nottinghamshire and how that's working. And as I said, I think it's very advantageous to be part of that larger family network. And for me, it's very family orientated. Actually, it's very important. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where that links in. And the fact is that not everyone does have that family network around them, and that obviously causes situations. But yeah.
Thank you. Mr Pettigrew, do you have something to add?
Yeah, if I could, Chair, just very briefly. The pandemic has made us more aware, even more aware, because we always were aware, not only about the importance about childcare, early years education, about the impact that it has on children, but also the impact that it has on families, to allow families to access work. So that economic thing that Councillor Welsh refers to. But in addition to that, it's not an insignificant small to medium employer. So the number of people that are employed in the sector is significantly important to the economy of Nottinghamshire. And it's the case that we have lent in to that sector during the pandemic, supported them significantly, not only financially, but also by lobbying and representation into central government with regards to why this sector is so important, why it needs to be sustained, and the risk it is of not being sustained given the financial model. Schools get paid by virtue of the numbers of pupils they have enroll. However many pupils are in a school. Our nurseries get paid on the basis of how many children go through the door. And during a pandemic, when many parents were furloughed, and therefore some of the choices that some of those parents were making was that they would mind their own children whilst furloughed and working from home. Or working from home. That meant that nurseries were seeing a drop in attendance, and a drop in attendance for them means a drop in income. We've worked really closely with the sector, and I think if you spoke to the sector in Nottinghamshire, they would say that's very different than what they've experienced in other local areas with regards to that. And we've made, as I say, significant representation, including representation from members to central government with regards to the importance of this sector. So it is a sector that we absolutely celebrate, and it's a sector that we speak to. I've not spoken with this sector more than I have done in the last 12 months in the previous 6 years. It's something that we value hugely.
Thank you, Mr Pettigrew. I think it's really important with this one to recognise some of the positives. I'm looking at page 74 and things like the entitlement of uptake. Sorry, the uptake of entitlement. Nottinghamshire is ranked highest in the region for the take-up of 2-year-old places. Now, we've had reports before this committee in past times where we've been pressing more and more for greater uptake 2-year-old places. Obviously, officers continue to do that, but the fact that we are achieving the uptake levels we are at the time that we are, I think is significant. That 96% of 3-year-olds and 93% of 4-year-olds are taking up their funded place is also testament to the work of officers in making people aware of their entitlements and encouraging them to use them. I would be interested to know whether we do have a work stream in terms of the reclaim of the 20%. I know that when I was working, my children were young many years ago, when government was promoting the scheme to have a sort of a salary set aside that you could use it for various different purposes, one of which was childcare. So I was aware of it because of the way that it was being promoted at the time that I became aware of it. So yes, I'd be curious to understand what's going on there. I'm also aware of officers having reported here that we have an oversupply, and it's actually that seems to be creating some of the potential fragility for providers going forward, particularly, and this is something that I've raised with officers, particularly if provision for 3- and 4-year-olds is extended in schools, which actually leaves the private sector market or even charities and third sector units delivering childcare for the 2-year-olds and babes. And Councillor Welsh, you'll particularly be aware that that involves higher staff ratios, which involves higher wages. So all of the cost burden on those private and third sector settings is much higher if they have, let's call it, a limited share of the market in terms of which part of the market they're serving. So there are some risks which officers acknowledge and are working to make sure don't cause greater problems for the sector. So I suppose if I ask Irene just to comment on that one question about the cost recovery, and then I'll take us to the vote.
Yeah, thank you. I think the tax-free childcare is it's a big priority nationally. There is low take-up nationally. We again, it's another one of those data things. We don't actually hold the data locally. It's not available. It's only available on a national basis to see what the take-up is of our tax-free childcare, but we know it is low. We have carried out campaigns. We have got a web page, but we also have the Families Information Service, which is an extremely proactive little team of 2 people who it's a statutory duty that we have to promote and to support families to access the childcare entitlements, funding, finding a childcare place, things to look out for and so on. So we're doing lots and lots, but we need to do more. So you'll have seen at the bottom of email footers recently, we've been running a campaign around recruiting into the childcare sector. It's likely we will do something like that again around tax-free childcare. We've got plans to jazz up our web pages and so on, but we are aware that lots of families don't know about it. We're often talking about working families in these cases as well. It works out about £2,000 a year that you could save. So yeah, a lot more needs to be done about it, and I'm grateful for people raising the issue. We do need to encourage families to take it up.
May I just...
Through the chair, Councillor Welsh, thank you.
Sorry, I do apologise.
Go ahead.
It's just, well, actually, yeah, it's yourself anyway, actually, perhaps, with officers. So I found out with it because it's standard practice in the nursery that my little boy goes to, that when you sign up, that is part of your welcome package to say, are you entitled to this? Are you entitled to this? And are you entitled to that? I mean, a simple letter or email, perhaps to early years settings, might be useful to say, is this something that you could include in your welcome pack to parents? Because all nurseries do it, and there's a childminding networks. And I think maybe that would just be, rather than on the bottom of emails, that might be a really quick, easy way to get that out and just say, here's an example. I'm sure the nursery that if I asked them, they'd happily supply what they give out to parents. But yeah, it was that was really useful within there. And I think if that's the case, that might be an easy way to get that out there as well.
No, and I would agree, and I'm grateful for the example of an initiative. I'm sure that officers would be open to, you know, other such ideas. We've talked about, I've talked with Councillor Smith lately when we've been doing the applications for school places about how we actually strengthen the message. So if you've got ideas about strengthening the message in a way that actually will successfully reach parents, then, you know, I'm completely open to that message being conveyed in the best way that we can. It is ultimately the only way that we're going to do the best for our families and children. So that said, if I can take us to the vote, the recommendation on page 77 has been moved and seconded. All of those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Item 10 is the Best Start Strategy 2021 to 25, and this is a progress update report. There are 2 recommendations on page 114, which I move.
And I second those, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have any comments or observations on this paper? Councillor Callaghan. Microphone, please.
Item 5, parents experience emotional, mental health and wellbeing challenges. Obviously, throughout the pandemic, I think this has been very problematic for parents because they've not been able to access quite a lot of services that in normal times they would be able to access. And with isolation as well, and children not in school, I think this has created an even bigger problem that is still quite outstanding for parents' mental health. And also, number 7, obviously £1 million was taken out of this budget 2 years ago. You know, practitioners have not been in to see children, children have not been able to see practitioners, and whilst IT has its pros, you know, in this case, the negatives, they need to be face-to-face, some of these interactions.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. I think both of the questions that you've raised, whilst this is a report before this committee, are primarily about healthcare services rather than local authority services. I think perhaps Mr Jones can actually respond for you on those.
Thank you. And part of my role is I'm the vice chair of this new Best Start strategy group, which I think has got real potential in terms of bringing together all the partners around all of these important issues. I think we know around parents' mental health, as you say, that it has been a real struggle, particularly over the period of the pandemic where parents haven't been able to access the same kind of support either from peers or professionals as they might have wanted to. I think we've got a real opportunity here actually in bringing together particularly the kind of the professional mental health workforce across the health sector, those people that have contact with parents and can identify early and provide levels of support, and the opportunities that we've got around peer-based support as well to do something really big around that as one of the things that we do, both around the development of family hubs, but also those wider networks really of people being able to work with families. So I think that can be really positive, as I say, and we know there's extra strides that we can make. Just in relation to speech and language, I mean, certainly what we haven't done is ever taken money out of speech and language services that we had put into speech and language services. We know there are issues with the previous provider in terms of the way that they had used some of the money in order to support some of those clinical pathways. We're clear now, we continue to make £500,000 available each year to the provider in terms of early language development and identification of need, which is the role that the local authority has got. And in fact, we spend more than nearly any other local authority in terms of that work. it's really important that we've got a kind of united pathway that makes sure that the clinical services that the CCGs are responsible for in terms of delivery of clinical speech and language services are working effectively alongside the services that we commission as well. And we're working really closely actually with partners to try and make sure that there's a single pathway in place that connects those things up. But overall, I think in terms of where we're going with Best Start, certainly the people that we've got round the table in terms of engagement, seniority and ambition, I think is probably better than we've ever been. And some of the areas that I'm really keen to see, preconception work, pre-birth work, actually getting people prepared for parenthood to begin with and then supporting them as they become parents. I think we've got one of the best opportunities that we've ever had if we all pull together. So it feels to me a really positive time, very early days, but a really positive time for making some changes for people.
Thank you, Mr Jones. Councillor Welsh and then Councillor Lee. Thank you.
Okay. Where to start with regards to this? So I did find this report a little troubling. The fact of the ambition on number 2 with regards to mothers and babies having a positive pregnancy outcomes. There's significant clinical issues within Nottinghamshire, which I know 2 councillors here that are certainly on the Health Scrutiny Committee have been part of some of those conversations and are very aware of what the situation actually is. I don't think the summary of progress is quite where it should be, and I think it should reflect what is happening. And I know what is going to be said. We are a local authority, but there's this situation with regards to mothers and babies and maternity it's serious, and I don't think that anyone in this room doesn't think that it's serious. But I just feel this Best Start strategy, where it talks about a data dashboard. The reality is this data dashboard should have been produced about 2 years ago, and it's only just been put online. I think there's a little bit of lack of connection with working with regards to what is happening, and I don't feel particularly that this part number 2 has enough detail, and I don't think it's doing as it should be doing. And Lawrence Jones just said about, Best Start, and it's the best possible start. I tell you who it hasn't got the best start for is those women today that are still worried about going into Nottinghamshire hospitals to have their babies. That's the reality of this situation, and I think as a local authority there just needs to be a bit more joined up thinking with regards to what is going on and best starts for women and babies, and I think there is a little bit missing there. That isn't actually a criticism of officers, it's not a criticism of you, it's my own personal experiences, it's personal experiences that we've heard at another Health Scrutiny Committee, and it's what women are telling me in the group that I'm involved with, and I would be doing them a disservice today if I haven't said what I have said. So that's my first point. The other point that I wish to make is regards to parents experiencing emotional, mental health and wellbeing challenges. I think it's really important that we again get back to the reality of this. Women that have got evidence of postnatal depression, that are saying that they are unwell post-birth, that have struggled during the pandemic, and actually I know a lot of women now that the mental health is starting now as we get back to a so-called normality, are not able to get the support they need. That is a fact. They are not getting the support that they need. They are going to GPs, and the only option that they are being able to give, because there aren't those resources out there and there aren't the services out there, is medication. Now, I'm not saying that medication is wrong, and I'm not going into the depths of it all, but there is a serious, serious issue here. And again, a multi-agency group has been working to strengthen the pathway of care for women with mental health needs. With mild to moderate, that may be, but where is this pathway? Because I tell you what, women can't find this pathway. It's not there. And this is the reality of a Best Start strategy. If these services aren't there in the first place, then how can women access them? I'm getting more and more frustrated and more upset with regards to these issues. And as you can see, I feel really quite passionate about it. And some of that does come from the emotional conversations that we have had at Health Scrutiny Committee, where quite frankly what is going on is an absolute disgrace. And I'm not prepared to accept this as a best start strategy, because I don't believe it is the best start strategy. And that's my initial feeling at the moment. Councillor Taylor, you might be able to shed more light onto it. The officers might be able to shed more light on it. But as it stands at the moment, maybe there's a bigger strategy that's out there that has got more information on it, with more outcomes on it, with more what will happen if this doesn't happen, and how are we going to support that, and how are we going to support with health. And if that's the case, I would need reassurance to see that before I sit here and say this is the best start strategy and mothers and babies have positive pregnancy outcomes in Nottinghamshire, because actually clearly that is not the case. So that's where I stand with this at the moment. I don't make any apologies for the fact that I feel very emotional and very strongly about this. But I will say again, I am pragmatic. So if you're able to come back to me and say there is more detail, there is a bigger plan, and actually we're looking at some of the work that we're doing in health scrutiny to how we best support women and babies in those early years, and the mental health support for women. And I also quickly want to say as well that let's not ignore the fathers element as well, because they're having a rough deal in all of this as well. So that's what I wanted to say, Councillor Taylor. So.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. I'm not for a moment dismissing what you've said, and I would like to come back to it. I will just take Councillor Lee's question first and then try and take things together. Thank you.
Chairman, a very quick one. My little boy uses the speech language, has done for many years. I'd be more than happy to speak to the officer afterwards about our experience with that service. I'm not comfortable saying it in this committee, but I'm more than happy to speak to the officer afterwards, if that would be suitable.
If you choose to speak to the officers on any subject, Councillor Lee, then please take that opportunity. I know, Councillor Welsh, you watch my face intently, and you often, when I'm listening to you, you often impute from that what you think I'm thinking. And I was struggling listening to you, because what you say resonates. Some of it resonates at a personal level. And I was debating with myself what I might feel comfortable saying. And you can probably tell from the way I'm pacing myself now, in this forum, there are some things I'm not comfortable saying. My children are now 22 and 23, so it's a long time since I was dealing with antenatal care or early years and my own experiences at that time. So I won't particularly articulate any of that any further, other than to say I take what you're expressing on behalf of your residents, the wider residents of the county, and your own experiences very seriously. That is not for a moment not recognised, not understood. And I'm trying to relate what you're expressing to this report in the sense that all of those health concerns, whether it's what you raised, what Councillor Callaghan raised, so we're looking at items 2 and 5 and 7 specifically, but it's probably 2 and 5, so the mental health and the mothers and babies. And I understand your caution, perhaps to a certain extent cynicism, about how seriously those issues for mothers and for parents experiencing difficulties will be addressed. It is true that so much of this rests with our health colleagues, but in saying that, that does not mean that I'm compartmentalising the issues and saying that's their problem, because of course it isn't. It's a problem for our residents, and therefore it's a problem for us. I will ask Mr. Jones to come back in a moment, but I'm taking very seriously your comments that you don't necessarily believe that this is the best thing. I don't think that what Mr. Jones was saying is what is here now is the best thing. I think what he is identifying is a better opportunity than we have had previously to have a louder voice with our health partners and other partners in actually achieving some of these ambitions. And if you look at the opening paragraph of this report, it says that this invites committee to review progress so far. And that's exactly what we're doing, and exactly what I would suggest your questions and the questions of colleagues are highlighting. And if we're saying that progress is not good enough, then that's what we need to keep challenging. So I believe, and Mr. Jones will either correct me or add more commentary, what's going on at Health and Wellbeing is very necessary. We do need some robust challenges to partners about outcomes for mothers and babies. We do need some robust challenges about whether health partners are delivering on the mental health and wellbeing challenges that we all face. So for me, this is a document about ambition and plan. It is where we are currently. It is not in any way fully formed, and it most certainly does not meet all needs. So I would actually invite officers to comment on how they think that they can incorporate your comments into the voice that they take when they are engaging in this forum, because that would be my challenge to officers if I'm hearing you correctly. Mr. Jones, would you like to comment?
Yes, I will do. Thank you. I would just start by saying we're in the first few months of what here is a 4-year strategy. So this was only signed off by the board a few months ago, and we're in the very early stages. And what it signals is ambitions for the next 4 years in terms of progress. I don't think there is any doubt that there are parts of the system that cause huge concern, and through a number of networks, including this Best Start Strategy Board, including the Safeguarding Partnership, we've been making challenges and asking for information regarding some of those areas of concern, particularly around maternity care. But similarly, there's a huge challenge in terms of the support more widely available, as I think Councillor Welsh has very eloquently expressed. So I don't think there's any denial of the fact that there are significant issues, particularly in the health sector, that we continue to have to challenge and expect improvements in. I think what this signals, though, is over the next 4 years is that we are stronger if we work together on some of these challenges, and rather than simply challenge each other, we get to support each other in terms of making those changes as well. And that's what we hope the Best Start will do, that it will bring together people. And we've got significant challenges coming to us in that group. Health Watch colleagues are on there. So it's not without a challenge in terms of the people on the group wanting and demanding improvements from partners around the table. It's certainly not the only group, but it's a good place where we can come together, I say, and try and make some positive progress in partnership, rather than just leaving individual agencies and organisations to try and make those progress on their own.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So if I can take us to the vote on... Sorry, Councillor Welsh, there's another question.
Apologies. May I just say a few things just to come back slightly on this so people are quite clear. Sometimes we're speaking then someone replies and I think, oh, they've misunderstood what I'm saying. So it's just a bit of clarity, really, with regards to things. I'm not saying that a Best Start strategy isn't a good thing. It's clearly a good thing and something that I would say is absolutely essential. What I am saying is the Best Start strategy isn't necessarily starting in the best place, if that does make sense. The key thing that is happening for mothers and babies with regards to pregnancy outcomes should reflect what is going on and what is happening in health scrutiny and what is being reported and the facts and figures from NUH. That's the starting point for item number 2, and that should clearly be on there, and that's the bit that I am concerned and worried about. The second bit that I'm really concerned and worried about is number 5, where it says additional training has been delivered to midwives and health visitors, and referral pathways to mental health support have been strengthened. And what I am saying is the experience of women in Nottinghamshire is that there is not even a pathway at the moment. So that's the 2 points that I'm making. I'm not against the Best Start strategy. What I'm saying is the content of the progress so far, that some priorities need to be changed somewhere, which is why I'm saying if there's a larger strategy document that we could all see as a committee, or that could be emailed over to me, that clearly states what we're doing with regard to this, then I will wholeheartedly support it and do whatever I can to get as much engagement as possible and do everything possible. But as it stands at this moment, this document that is in front of me, I feel that I can't support it because I know this doesn't reflect reality and it's not what's happening. And I think that's really, really important for us as a committee, for officers here that I know understand the situation. What I would hate to happen today is for us all to put our hands up with regards to this report, and more information is going to come out about mothers and babies in NUH, and then there's an issue. So that's my apprehension here and why I've said what I have said today. So of course I support a Best Start strategy. It's actually fundamentally everything I believe in. But we have to start at the best point. And I'm not sure that this is, from what's being demonstrated in this document, that is the best point, is my question. So if there's a bigger document available, can we see it? And can we have those wider discussions about actually how we really help women and babies?
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. I don't think, well, certainly from a personal point of view, I did not understand you to be saying that you do not support a Best Start strategy. I did understand that you were saying we're not in the best, starting from the best place. I noted down your comments about the data dashboard in effect being 2 years too late. But the fact is, that's where we are today. So the only place from which we can start is where we are today. I would ask officers if there is a deeper, more detailed document which is available for sharing. That may or may not exist. I might even suggest, and we've moved the recommendation so far, but I might suggest an amendment to one of the recommendations, because we're talking about approving the suggested next steps. And I might suggest that we're tasking officers to challenge partners in some of the ways that you have said. So instead of just approving the suggested next steps, that we do need to impress upon partners some of those other concerns that you've articulated. But that I'd need to take guidance on amending recommendations, and my officers looking very seriously at me.
I think I want to take some advice. You've moved the recommendation as it stands.
That's fine. That's fine.
To do.
That's fine.
If you wanted me to go and check that, I'd be happy to do so. We need to adjourn, I think. Need to adjourn in order to check that.
I'm not
because
even
you have
necessarily, from the faces, it's not necessarily anything that anybody's seeking. It could be simply something that we take beyond the meeting, with officers being very clear on members' direction to press our partners more hardly. Sorry, Councillor Welsh.
I would like some definite reassurance. I'd prefer it to be a recommendation, if I'm completely honest, and it's there. And it's down and it's in print, and I can actually take that to those women to say this is what we're doing. That's what I would prefer. I understand an adjournment isn't always the ideal way to do things, but as I have pointed out, I feel so strongly about this that I'm not going to back down on this, and I know that you don't expect me to and don't see it that way, but I do feel if it was actually there as a recommendation, I would feel more comfortable with that. just so it's down there. And again, I know you said about cynicism and stuff like, it's not cynicism, it's reality. I've been in not here at the council, but with regards to women and babies, where people have said things are going to be done and then it's not seen as a priority. And again, I'm not saying that will happen, but for me, it's a lesson learned, and I would rather it be down there as a recommendation, if that would be okay, Councillor Taylor.
So when I use language like cynicism, that was not pejorative. That is how you perceive things based on your past experience. And I would say, on what you're saying, that's quite right. Before I ask for any other action from officers, can I just take Councillor Barney's question?
It's a comment, and it's not really a question. It's been in part answered. I just felt the need to respond as well to some of the statements Councillor Walsh has made as Vice Chair of the Health Scrutiny Committee. I completely accept and actually stand with Councillor Walsh's sentiments, particularly around points 2 and 5, especially 2. And I think they're coming from a perspective that the maternity NUH maternity services are in a position of extreme crisis. And we have been going through that in great detail at Health Scrutiny. However, I think that we still need to have the aspirations which are correct and true, and Nottinghamshire needs to improve its services. And so my understanding is that this is a step towards that. And even though, and I think it's probably a lack of confidence that Councillor Welsh is speaking from, because things are so bad, can those foundations ever be good enough for this strategy to ever be anything other than lip service? But we still need to make, I think, have those aspirations clearly put before us and have something to stand on to build on. I'd also say that in terms of where we've got to with the health scrutiny and with NUH and the review of maternity services, things are at the lowest level they could possibly be. But the health scrutiny are very much hoping to work with and support the new Director of Midwifery. And I'm wondering if there's some overlap with some of these points that we work with her, Sharon Wallace, in trying to achieve this and take this strategy forward. But I totally get where you're coming from, Councillor Walsh, and I share those concerns that things are so dire. Can any strategy sit on top of those foundations at the moment which are crumbling? But I believe they can.
So, based on what officers commented and what we've talked about, I'm going to make another suggestion, if I may, because that was my offer before was born of my own inexperience in terms of process. That having moved and had seconded the recommendations today, to ask for a reprise of this report to come back to committee in short order with recommendation, another recommendation that would include some of those feelings that you've expressed today in terms of our robustness in acting with partners. So I suppose I'm asking whether, in order to conclude the report as we have it before us today, that members would be willing to accept that suggestion that on the work programme we have a reprise of this report in short order, so in another committee or two's time, and to check with officers whether that would be.
Chairman, you want me to check to see if you can technically amend it once you've moved it? If I just check with the senior officer.
Thank you.
Could we now make this like 10 minutes?
Yeah. So if we take that advice and we take an adjournment, which will at least allow you all to go for a walk and warm up, and we come back into here at 12:30. Thank you. Thank you. So apologies, members, for the adjournment. That I think it was necessary because of the points that were raised during the debate. We have had confirmation that I can move, although the recommendations that we have been moved and seconded, I can move an amended set of recommendations. So that's what we're proposing to do now. So I would suggest 3 recommendations, the 2 which are already in your papers, and a third which reads that committee notes the concerns expressed by members about the items at paragraph 10.2 and 5 and asks that a further report with detailed action plans come back to this committee in due course. So I move that set of 3 recommendations, if I have a seconder.
I second that, Chair.
Thank you. If I can move that to the vote now so that we can move on. All of those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. And I would just add in concluding that piece, I appreciate the support and cooperation of colleagues in actually trying to get us to a place that was both procedurally legal and met the concerns that you've expressed. Thank you. So I'm hoping this one will be a shorter one, Councillor Smith. This is item 11, outcome of Ofsted inspections. And this is a termly update. There are 3 recommendations on pages 122 and 123 of your papers, which I move.
Thank you, Chairman. Second those, and I congratulate those inspections that have taken place on retaining their good rating. Thank you.
Do I have any comments or questions on this particular item? Councillor Henry.
It's not political. It's just a comment. I know there are quite a lot of backlog on this at the moment, and how confident are we moving forward? Any idea?
Confident over the quality of education in our schools or over Ofsted re-embarking on? My understanding is that the inspection regime is reopened and that Ofsted are now back to inspecting schools. Marion isn't with us today. I don't know if Mr Pettigrew can comment further.
That is the case. I think Councillor Henry is asking, are we confident that Ofsted can get back up and running? Yeah. Which is a strange question in some ways, Councillor Henry, with respect. But yes, we are. Ofsted are now back up and running, yeah, and physically visiting our schools.
And having gone through the meeting this far, I have literally only just made the observation that Mr Jones is being Marion Clay today, and your own label is on the empty desk behind you. Which will have been causing presumably quite a lot of confusion on the live feeds. But if there are no other comments or observations on this paper, can I take us to the vote on this one? All of those in favour? Councillor Lee, are you with us? Thank you, that one's carried. Item 12, the extended duties of the head of the virtual school. There is 1 recommendation on page 134, which I move.
Seconded, Chairman. Reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Do I have any comments or observations on this paper? Is there anything that officers would like to add about this particular paper? Yeah, my understanding is it's straightforward based on an extension of duties imposed on us in running the virtual school, and that this is purely to rationalise staffing capacity in order to deal with those extended duties. So if I've got no questions, I'll take us straight to the vote on that one. All of those in favour? Thank you, that's also carried. Item 13 is the School Capital Programme Progress Report and the Building Improvement Programme, and I do thank officers for their patience through some lively debates earlier on and for sticking with us. There are 2 recommendations on page 146, which I move.
Thank you, Chairman. I second those and reserve the right to speak.
And do I have any questions on this paper, please? Goodness me. Oh, Councillor Meakin, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment. I welcome investment to improvements to Kingsway Primary School and Morven Park Primary School, where I am a governor. At Morven Park, we've been pushing for the improvements without being pedantic. Can I point out that Eastleigh Primary is in Mansfield, not in Ashfield, as in Appendix 1.
Mr. Beryl, what do you have to say about your geography?
Apologies, we will get that amended.
Thank you. Councillor Welsh.
Yeah, it's just a quick question, and I do apologise. I have read this report, but I've forgotten something. Is within this report, does it include the builds that have happened at Colton Academy and Carlton Willows? I'm assuming that it has. And if it has, can I just say how fantastic I think that it is? There was a need emerging with regards to school places, and it certainly played a really big role in kind of combating that. And the feedback that I've had is, especially the one at Carlton Academy, that everything's gone really, really well. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is that Stanhope School has had some work done, or about to have some work done, I do believe, and obviously I welcome that as well. The question that I have is, do we have enough resources to do everything that we need with regards to the schools in Nottinghamshire? Is there kind of a waiting list as such? I think a school is a bit like when you buy a house, you do one thing and then something else goes, and it's kind of an ongoing thing with regards to any building. But I just wondered, and it doesn't have to be answered here because obviously we're in a tight scan, but I just wondered where we are just in general with schools and buildings, and how that's reflected with academies, etc. That's a really big question, so I actually don't expect to be full reply here, but just wondered.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. From my own perspective, I would say, it's not just like buying a house, it's like the Forth Bridge, and we just keep painting from one end of the county to the other. And I take it by sufficiency of resources. Were you talking about financial resources, manpower, or a combination, just so that I can actually direct officers to be able to give you some form of answer today?
I think it's a bit of a combination, really. I think it's on top of some of the issues that have been brought to light with regards to ventilation in classrooms as well, due to ongoing issues with regards to the pandemic, and now it's getting colder outside and they can't necessarily have the windows open, although we have in here. It's cold. Yeah. It's just, there are emerging issues, aren't there, with schools. It's like everything. I think Steve Edwards says everything seems to have changed after the pandemic, but there are some emerging issues where there are classrooms that don't have the appropriate ventilation, and I don't want to go on a different thing here, but it'd be just useful to know where we are with all of those things, I think.
I think if officers maybe answer more in the context, not of the issues that are emerging, because in some ways we don't know what they are, or how long they'll last, and if COVID goes away, whether they still figure, but just how you approach prioritising against finite resources.
Obviously, yes. I sat on the report. We have to prioritise based on what we know of the estate, and we prioritise on the matters that are most likely to close a building. Should that be a failure of a heating system, a roof leak, whatever that might be. So we have to prioritise on health and safety and to keep those buildings open for the children of Nottinghamshire. Just quickly on the point around the ventilation, it's a difficult challenge at the moment that we need to maintain ventilation, like we have in this room today. As the weather gets colder, it's difficult because we need to keep those windows open to keep the air change. It is the policy for government that schools are being provided with CO2 monitors, which can help them monitor the quality of the air, and if that quality is clean enough, then they can close those windows for a while and carry on in a warmer environment. So that's sort of in process of being rolled out to schools. So hopefully that's going to improve things for that. And in the longer term, we have to look at what systems we install in schools so they can be better adapted in scenarios such as this. The whole programme of what we do is subject to resources available, and that particularly in funding in that. And what this report sets out is, you know, particularly for the school building improvement programming, is having a long pipeline, because there's a lot of work to do, but we have to manage that over a number of years, both in the funding we have and the resourcing, the contractors and the capacity at Art Partnership and within the council and the commissioning team on getting those projects delivered.
Thank you, Mr Beryl. Do I have any other questions? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on Councillor Welsh's point about Carlton Academy and Carlton Willows, page 140 details that, so they are in there. Carlton Academy creates 60 new places, Carlton Willows 134 new places. The good thing about that is, if you looked at place planning and the grids, Carlton was in the red, so we took action there, and those new places ensure that there's a surplus of places in the Carlton planning area, which both of those schools are in, and that does take into account places like Teal Close and Chase Farm expanding as well. And we, as the committee chair and vice chair, have monitored that closely and ensure that that's the case. So good news for that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Callaghan.
For 2022, will the authority have enough places for special educational schools for children who require special educational needs in specialist provision?
I mean, perhaps we will talk about that outside committee, because I think in the context of this paper and what officers are in a position to deal with today, this is about the capital and build programme and maintenance as opposed to place planning. So if that's something that you want to pursue with me outside the committee meeting, I'm quite happy. It's not something which is in the purview of the officers in the context of this report. Any other comments or observations? I had one question, gentlemen, and I don't know quite how we tackle it, because obviously we receive this report at intervals. Can't remember if it's 6 monthly or yearly. So I can remember a couple of the schools in my patch that were on there last year, which aren't on there now. So when I'm looking at this as a point in time, what I'm missing is the continuum. So I don't know, without creating a whole other industry, how it's possible for members to have a sense of what's happened in the period between what we see in one report and what's in the next one, because some work may have been undertaken, some may have gone through feasibility and not been necessary, or we're trying to find the money somewhere else, all sorts of different reasons. But what I'm missing is the continuum at the minute, and I suspect that may be helpful for other members as well. So not obviously part of the papers and the decisions today, but something maybe for us to have a sense of going forward?
Absolutely. I think it's that, you know, the projects can vary considerably in their size. So some are delivered within months and some are delivered within years, you know, and especially when you have to arrange your work around the schools being closed across summer holidays or Christmas breaks, etc. So what you're asking for really is that progress, that snapshot at a period of time, showing where we are with all those different programs, and we can look to provide that. We hold that information.
Thank you. So if there are no other comments, then I will take us to the vote. 2 recommendations, page 146. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. If you're not frozen already. Yeah. Item 14 is elective home education update. 1 recommendation on page 156, which I move.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Any comments, observations, questions on this paper? No? I'm going to be like the auctioneer. I'm not going to hang around too long before I bring the gavel down. So if we can take that one directly to the vote. All of those in favour? Thank you, that's also carried. Item 15, the Local Transformation Plan for Children and Young People's Emotional and Mental Health, and this is an update report with 1 recommendation at page 170, which I move.
And I second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Any observations, questions on this paper? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you. Excuse me. In paragraph 5 of the report, we talk about the rise of referrals in children and young people accessing mental health services. So it talks about having offered both telephone and online support where clinically appropriate, including group works. Providers have shared that some children, young peoples and families didn't want to access these services either through the telephone or through virtual support. During the work that's been done to provide this update, have we managed to pull out any clear reasons for why they didn't want this remote help? And do we have any statistics on what the percentage of remote services is currently provided compared to face-to-face help?
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. I think have I got Catherine on the call for this one? Catherine, are you able
Yes,
to help with those
thank you.
questions?
I can, yes. So I think that some people, some families and young people decided that they didn't want face-to-face, they didn't want a virtual assessment and really wanted that direct support with a practitioner, and that's, I think, personal preference, whereas some people really did like actually and prefer having online support. I think everybody's different, and our providers need to be able to offer going forward a blended model where people have a choice in the delivery for their services. So what we have done and are doing now is working with our providers to understand what the split was in terms of during the pandemic, how many people were offered kind of direct support and how many virtual. And that's something that we're monitoring now going forward with our providers to ensure that we've got that mix and that we're continually getting feedback from parents and carers and young people about their experience so that we have that choice going forward.
I'm assuming that this virtual support was born of the pandemic as opposed to it being one of the routes available prior to the pandemic. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's relatively new, but there's no data set for it at the minute. It is something you're aware of and are therefore seeking to create a data set. How often does this report come to committee then, and when do you think that data may be available? I think that's kind of trying to get to addressing Councillor Williamson's question, because it may not be there now, but when will it?
Yes, so we've just started to receive the first reporting by our primary provider, Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust, which does provide this level. So I can see whether I could get that provided for the minutes as a post-meeting note with the split across child and adolescent mental health services. This report currently is provided annually, so it would be a while unless an update is required more
so
I suppose in advance.
So taking what you're telling me, and given that I don't want to assume things I can't do again, I'm looking to Mr. Gately to advise. I can't imagine we want to wait a year to have the data. And although you will recognise, councillors, that the data that is available is fresh and new and therefore untested and uncompared, if it's possible to have that as a note in the minutes, is that a technical possibility or not?
Because you're identifying actions to...
Sorry.
Okay, because you're identifying actions to undertake in these recommendations. I think you're at liberty to identify things that you would require.
Okay. And Mr. Pettigrew is pointing out to me that in terms of the work plan and the forward plan, there is an item on that to come forward in June, which is still some way off. So given that we are identifying, as you're advising me, actions to take, I think it would be useful for us to have some data sooner than later, Catherine, please. And then to pick it up in a more substantiated form in the June committee report, which is already scheduled. Do you want to come back, Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, firstly, just with the question, obviously, as I am a substitute member of this committee, when that data does come back, could I ask that I receive it as well, as it is something that I do have a a personal interest and passion about. And then I also just want to finish off with a comment, with your indulgence, that I do really like what's coming through this, and I do look forward to seeing the updates coming through, and I will be keeping an eye on them, even if I am not a full member of this committee. As somebody at that point now deciding what information to share and what not to share, for myself personally, for several years I had to receive mental health counselling in various forms, both telephone and in person, due to significant health issues that I had as a young person. And so I really do rate the work that is being done here, but I'd also ask people, although it is COVID and we do have to move to more virtual services, that for somebody like myself, although I never had an issue with the telephone and the less face-to-face, you fundamentally cannot be, when you're talking about your own struggles, your own experiences, the things that give you the issues that you have, you cannot be that face-to-face. So I would always strongly recommend to officers and to counsellors that is something that we don't lose sight of in the drive for modernity. You cannot be face-to-face when you're talking about the most troubling issues that you face in your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. So again, in terms of actions that we require, I'm hoping that you were picking that up okay, Catherine, on the transmission, but that Councillor Williamson is asking that we continue to press for face-to-face facilities being available. So for anybody who doesn't want the remote ones, who doesn't feel as comfortable or have their needs met through that means, and also that the data that he's asking for should be available to members as soon as possible. And I guess, Martin, for the request to be noted that Councillor Williamson is actually a sub, so it does actually need to reach him as well. Thank you. Councillor Welsh.
I will be really quick, promise. This is really with regards to CAMS, and I would just like some clarity, if that is possible, by yourself. I've been contacted by a number of residents whose children have either been referred to CAMS and have one case, for example, I've just brought the email up here, where they've been waiting 12 months to access services. I've also had another resident that's contacted me to say that it is all her understanding, I would like some clarity on this, that the referral criteria from CAMS has actually changed. So what is an ongoing issue where a child has been referred to, say, 2 years or 18 months previously, the referral criteria is now changed and they're unable to access that CAMS support anymore. So there's two questions there, really. One, has the referral criteria for CAMS changed? And two, is the reality with regards to mental health support when it gets to that level, is the reality the same as what it is across the country, that we have waiting lists where vulnerable children are unable to access mental health support services? So that would be my question, and I know that's quite direct, but if I'm trying to move this on. So those are my questions.
Thank you. Catherine, are you able to answer? Thank you.
Thank you. So in Nottinghamshire, we have a number of providers that provide support, and we have not recently made any changes to the commissioning thresholds for any of those services. They remain what they would have been pre-pandemic, and young people can self-refer to all services, and information on the services available to young people can be accessed via that Notts Alone website, which is referenced in the paper. In relation to waiting times, this is a local and national pressure, and an area which we are working really hard with all of our providers to try and manage. During the pandemic, a number of services received referrals, doubling what they had previously received, and their kind of waiting lists are increasing. However, we are working with them to put in place mitigation plans. So we currently have agency staff supporting Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. We are taking part in an NHS England pilot to look at different ways of working to ensure that we can provide additional support to children and young people. At the moment, the waiting time to assessment is 9.8 weeks, and the waiting time reported to treatment is 13.5 weeks. That's within community CAMHS, though there are small differences between localities. However, as I've said, due to an increase in referrals in the last few months, we are trying to manage those waiting times. And the Healthcare Trust can investigate any referrals if they appear to be outside of that waiting time, which you've said in that case example.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Welsh.
So just for clarity, because you said it in weeks and my math isn't my strongest area. So are we talking about from the moment of referral until they get to actually see somebody is about 6 months? You said 9 weeks initially, was it 9.8? And then did you say 13 weeks for the next part? So
it's inclusive. So the 13.5 weeks is inclusive of the referral to the treatment time. Sorry, I was also providing the assessment period, but that is inclusive.
So so for clarity, sorry, this is from assessment to the point where they're assessed, and yes, this child does need support, help in whatever way. What is the time of that from assessment to when somebody is seen? What is the average time is what I'm saying. So what is the waiting list time would be my question.
I think I'm looking at 3.5 weeks, Catherine, am I? You're saying the difference between 9.8 and 13.5.
Yes, that's the average, and that is the average for community CAMHS. But it is important to note that there are many services that are commissioned to provide support to children and young people. COOF provide online counselling, which should be available every day without a waiting list. We have a crisis team, which is able to provide for young people and families who are experiencing a crisis, immediate access and support, and an eating disorder service, which should be able to respond to referrals within a week or 2 weeks, depending on the presentation, if it's urgent, if it's a kind of routine presentation, the time frame for them is around 4 weeks. There are pressures in meeting these time frames, but there is a real emphasis on putting in place as much as we can to meet our population's needs and to have responsive services. But we do continue to face increasing referrals, but those are the most recent reported community waiting times, which I've shared with you today.
Thank you, Catherine. So if there are no more comments and observations, and we've already made some requests of officers following this meeting, can I take us to the vote on the recommendation on page 170? All of those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Item 16, local governor appointments to school governing bodies during the period June to September. There is, oops, wrong page, one recommendation on page 174, which I move. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I second that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Lee, you have a question.
Thank you very much. As a school governor for 2 terms at Orchard and 1 term at Coddington, it's great to see we have 5 new governors coming forward and 2 original governors come forward. So it's not really a question more than a comment, I apologise. But it's great to see that we get more people that want to be school governors. And for people that do it, it's a great enjoyment, and it allows you to make a good impact into your local schools. That's everything, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And comments are allowed. It doesn't all have to be questions. It's appreciated. Councillor Smith, did you want to add anything? You usually reserve your right to speak.
Yeah, no, Councillor Lee put it better than I could. I'm a governor as well, and just to thank those who do come forward, because they make a huge impact to the level of education across the county, and it's a really rewarding job, but it can be tough at times, particularly if Ofsted goes the wrong way for you, and it takes a lot of your time. So a lot of time into this, but very rewarding. So just to thank them for coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Mr. Pettigrew.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Our governors are probably the largest voluntary workforce in the country, looking after the schools and the 340 schools that we've got governing bodies for within Nottinghamshire. And they're dealing with very complex, big budgets, complex HR, and probably an area that is most inspected and regulated than any other area, and I'm grateful. And I know that Councillor Smith this morning has spent some time with a school, one of our special schools, St Giles, which not only demonstrates in the last 5 years when governance goes wrong, where a school can find itself, and when governance is right, where a school can find itself. The turnaround that the governing body have achieved in St Giles is outstanding, and I'm grateful for the leadership that the governors have offered there.
Mr. Pettigrew, and I would just add, obviously we are extremely grateful to those who volunteer as school governors. I think it's probably particularly noteworthy how they have conducted themselves in supporting the schools that they are governors for in the last 18 months, because not only have we been working in a different way in a different world, but the schools have operated throughout. I think we've thanked the staff at intervals in committee and elsewhere for the work that they've put in. I can't think of many head teachers that have had many holidays off, in actual fact, since we started in March last year. But in actual fact, a lot of work has been undertaken by governors as well. And I think it's only right and proper to actually recognise that along with everything else. So that said, can I have a vote on the recommendations? All of those in favour, please. Thank you, that's carried. And you will be pleased to know that the final item on today's agenda is the work programme. There is one recommendation on page 178, which I move.
Seconded, Chairman.
Any comments, questions or observations on the work programme? Councillor Henry.
No, the previous, but one item that we talked about, that the report coming in June, and we wanted something earlier. Is it something that we will put on here?
My understanding of our discussion is that the data which is available or shortly to be available will come to us as committee members sooner, and that a more worked report will come in June, which will presumably be able to at least draw some, maybe draw some conclusions from the data over an extended period, but will give us more meat at that time. So I'm not sure that a report any sooner would necessarily have any value for us. So if we can take a vote on accepting that work programme. All of those in favour, thank you. In which case, I can thank you all for your attendance. Apologise that you are all frozen. Coming from Bassetlaw in the north. We can close the live stream now, Stuart, thank you.